My name is Rachel Morgan, and I am 28 years old. I never imagined that the worst humiliation of my life would happen not in the streets or at work, but at the dinner table of my own in-laws. It was supposed to be a private family dinner inside the Ashford Mansion in Connecticut. A quiet evening with wine and polished silverware. Instead, it turned into a scene that will never leave my memory. The long mahogany table stretched across the room and candles flickered on top of it. I sat at one end near my husband Daniel. My sister-in-law Serena lounged across from me, her manicured fingers tapping impatiently against her wine glass. At the head of the table was Eleanor, my mother-in-law, her posture straight as if the chair were a throne. The air was already tense. I could feel judgment pressing against me like heavy fog. It started with glares and short comments. Serena smirked when I reached for the breadbasket, whispering something under her breath. Eleanor looked at my dress with disdain. Daniel stayed quiet, staring at his plate as though he was not part of the same room. I tried to breathe slowly to hold myself together. I thought if I stayed polite, if I said little, the dinner would pass. I was wrong. Serena suddenly pushed her chair back, the scraping of wood against marble cutting through the silence like a blade. She walked toward me, her heels clicking sharply. Before I could move, before I even processed what she was doing, she lifted her leg and kicked me hard in the side. The force knocked me backwards. My chair slid across the floor, and I hit the cold marble with a thud that rattled my bones. The pain shot through my hip and up my spine. For a second, my vision blurred. I gasped for breath, stunned. My palms pressed against the floor, trying to push myself up. That was when Eleanor rose from her seat. She stepped toward me with slow, deliberate movements. Her eyes burned with contempt. She leaned down close enough for me to see the lines etched deep into her face, and with a look of pure hatred she spat on me. The warm, disgusting weight hit my cheek and slid down toward my chin. Her voice followed sharp and venomous. "You are trash," she hissed. "You shame this family by even sitting at this table." The humiliation was worse than the pain. I felt my head pounding from where it had struck the floor, but it was the spit and the words that seared into my skin. My heart hammered in my chest. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck inside me. I looked toward Daniel, my husband, the man who had promised to protect me, the man I had chosen to build a life with. He did nothing. He simply sat with his arms folded, eyes cold and detached. "Do not make a scene, Rachel." Daniel muttered, his tone flat as if I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You deserved this. You needed to be taught a lesson." In that instant, the world tilted. The one person I thought would defend me had chosen silence, and worse than silence, agreement with their cruelty. The room closed in on me. I could taste salt and iron in my mouth from biting my tongue. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the floor and escape the humiliation pressing down from every side. Then it happened. The heavy oak door at the end of the dining room creaked open. At first, I thought it was another servant bringing food, but when the door swung wide, the light from the hallway spilled across the marble floor, and a familiar figure appeared. It was Mary Collins, our elderly neighbor, holding a small bag of cookies she had baked. She had been invited earlier in the day to drop them off for dessert. She had not expected to walk in on violence. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Me on the floor, clutching my side. Eleanor leaning over me with spit still glistening on my cheek. Serena smirking with satisfaction. Daniel sitting motionless. Mary gasped audibly. Her hand flew to her mouth. The Ashfords froze. The mask of superiority slipped from Eleanor's face for a brief second. Serena's smirk faltered. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. None of them had expected a witness. They believed their cruelty would remain hidden within these walls, sealed like all their secrets. But now Mary Collins had seen everything. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, my body trembling from the blow, but I saw the shock in their eyes. For the first time, they looked vulnerable. For the first time, I was not alone. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, a spark of resolve flickered. I would not let this night vanish into silence. The Ashford mansion had always felt less like a home and more like a fortress of wealth, with tall iron gates, endless marble floors, and portraits of stiff ancestors glaring from the walls. To anyone on the outside, it was a symbol of success and refinement, but to me, it was a gilded cage where every glance and every word carried judgment. Eleanor Ashford. My mother-in-law ruled this fortress with the precision of a general. She wore pearls around her neck as if they were medals of honor, and every movement of her hands, every tilt of her chin reminded me that she believed she was above me. She never forgave Daniel for marrying a woman from Ohio with no family money, and she never forgave me for daring to hold my head high despite her disdain. Serena Ashford. My sister-in-law was Eleanor's mirror image in a younger body, sharp, fashionable, and dripping with arrogance. She had grown up in privilege and believed it gave her the right to trample anyone she saw as beneath her. To her, I was not a person but a target for mockery, the intruder who had dared to marry her brother. She never missed a chance to laugh at my simple clothes, my job as a bookkeeper, or my quiet manner. She called me plain and boring words she thought cut deeper than knives. Then there was Daniel, my husband, who should have been my ally. Instead, he sat at that long table silent and pliant, a man pulled in every direction by the grip of his mother. Eleanor controlled his finances, his reputation, even his confidence. I had seen him speak boldly at work gatherings, but the moment we stepped into this house, his shoulders slumped, his voice weakened, and he obeyed her with the reflex of a child afraid of punishment. The air inside the mansion was heavy with control, and that night at dinner it felt as though every surface was pressing me down. The table gleamed under the weight of polished silverware and crystal glasses, but to me it was not a dinner setting. It was a battlefield dressed in linen. Eleanor sat in her chair like a monarch, Serena lounged like a soldier ready for attack, and Daniel remained the unwilling recruit too afraid to choose his side. I had sat through dinners like this before, filled with small digs and cruel smirks, but on this night the hostility was sharper. The air charged like before a storm. I tried to focus on the details around me, the dripping of candle wax, the faint clinking of forks, anything that would ground me, but the atmosphere was suffocating. I could feel eyes cutting into me, measuring me, dismissing me. This was not a family gathering. This was an interrogation masked as hospitality. Every question Eleanor asked about my work was coded in sarcasm. Every comment from Serena about the food turned into a jab at my cooking. Every sip of wine Daniel took became another reminder of his refusal to defend me. Sitting there felt like being strapped into a chair under a harsh light, accused of crimes I never committed. And yet, I kept silent, trying to survive, hoping the evening would pass without escalation. But deep down, I knew that this house never allowed peace. In the Ashford home, silence was not safety. Silence was only the pause before the next strike. The first blow that night did not come with fists or feet, but with words sharp and cruel, aimed to wound deeper than any physical strike. Serena leaned back in her chair, her wineglass dangling carelessly from her hand, and with a smirk that spread slowly across her face, she let her voice slice through the strained quiet. "I still do not understand what Daniel ever saw in you, Rachel. You look so plain tonight, so ordinary. Honestly, you remind me of a housemaid who wandered into the wrong dining room." Her words echoed across the table and hung there like smoke. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. I had learned long ago that reacting only fed her cruelty. Still, the sting of her insult burrowed into me, not because it was clever, but because it was delivered with such casual malice as though reducing me was entertainment. Eleanor placed her fork down delicately, every motion precise, and joined her daughter's attack with a voice dipped in false concern. "My dear Daniel is a man of potential, a man who deserves a partner who can host dinners, attend galas, and elevate his standing. You work in an office crunching numbers all day. That is not the future this family envisioned for him." Her gaze locked on mine, cold and assessing, as if I were an unworthy applicant in a job interview I had already failed. I looked toward Daniel, hoping for even a flicker of defense, a hand on my shoulder, a quiet word of comfort. But he only lifted his glass and took another long drink, his eyes avoiding mine. His silence was louder than their insults. It screamed complicity. My pulse quickened not from fear, but from the effort of containing my anger. I felt my nails press crescents into the palms of my hands under the tablecloth. Eleanor was not finished. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a smile that never touched her eyes. You have no idea how many women were interested in my son, women from good families, educated, refined. Instead, he brought home someone who forgive me for saying this has no grace, no polish, no real value in this circle. Daniel needs more than a wife who can manage grocery lists. He deserves a partner who makes this family proud. Her words were daggers dressed in silk. Serena laughed softly, the kind of laugh that is less amusement and more declaration of superiority. Exactly, Mother. She does not belong here. She is a misfit trying to play a role that does not suit her. Look at her. Even her dress is cheap. Do you even know which fork to use, Rachel, or do you just copy the rest of us and hope no one notices? The laughter that followed was like sandpaper against my skin. Daniel placed his glass down finally, but instead of addressing them, he looked at me with faint irritation, as though my presence at the table was the problem, not their cruelty. He said nothing, and that silence hurt more than their words. My throat tightened, but I refused to let tears form. I stared at the flickering candle in front of me and willed myself to stay calm. If I let them see me break, they would win. My lips pressed together until they hurt. Inside, I felt a fire start to build, a spark of rage that glowed hotter with every insult. I knew then that my silence could not last forever. Their words, their contempt, their constant degradation were weaving a rope meant to strangle me. But what they did not realize was that the more they pulled that rope tight, the more they revealed their own cruelty, and one day soon, that cruelty would hang them instead. Dot. The insults could have ended there, left to rot in the air like spoiled fruit. But Serena never knew when to stop. She lifted her wine glass, swirled the red liquid lazily, then, with a deliberate flick of her wrist, she tossed it across the table. The wine splashed against my blouse, a dark stain spreading like blood across the fabric. The cold wetness clung to my skin, and I could hear her laugh, sharp and cruel, echoing through the dining room. For a moment, I froze, staring at the mess seeping into the cloth, the scent of fermented grapes heavy in my nostrils. Heat flared inside me, and I finally spoke, my voice shaking but steady enough to cut through their laughter. Why are you doing this? What have I ever done to deserve this kind of hatred? My words hung there, fragile yet defiant. Serena's eyes narrowed, her smirk hardening into something vicious. She slammed her glass back onto the table and moved quickly around the chairs. Before I could stand, before I could shield myself, her foot connected with my side in a sudden violent kick. The force sent me sprawling again, my body colliding with the cold marble floor, the shock of pain exploding through my ribs. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to pull in air, the sharp ache making every inhale feel like knives slicing through me. I could hear the scrape of my chair toppling behind me and the rush of blood pounding in my ears. Then came Eleanor. She rose with a calmness that made my skin crawl, each step measured as though she were walking down a runway instead of approaching her fallen daughter-in-law. She stood over me, her shadow falling across my face, and without hesitation she spat directly onto my cheek. The warm spit slid down toward my jaw, mixing with the sticky wine already staining me. Her voice sliced into me more than the physical humiliation. Do you understand now, Rachel? You are nothing. You will never be part of this family. You are a disgrace. My hands trembled as I tried to push myself up the marble slick beneath my palms. I looked toward Daniel, desperate, hoping against all hope that this time he would act. But his face remained expressionless, his arms folded as though he were an observer at a spectacle he had long grown bored of. His voice was flat, detached, devoid of care. Do not make this worse, Rachel. You brought this on yourself. You need to be corrected. The words pierced deeper than any kick or spit. My own husband, the man who had once whispered promises of love and loyalty, now stood as a silent executioner of my dignity. My chest heaved with a mixture of pain and rage, but before despair could consume me, a movement at the doorway shifted everything. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the faint creak of hinges and the spill of warm light from the hallway. The heavy oak door opened, and in stepped Mary Collins, our elderly neighbor, carrying a small tin wrapped in a checkered cloth. She had been invited to bring dessert, a kind gesture that had accidentally turned her into a witness. She froze, her eyes widening in shock as she took in the sight before her. Me, crumpled on the floor, Eleanor hovering over me, Serena standing with satisfaction painted on her face, and Daniel unmoved at the table. Mary gasped, the sound sharp in the silence, her hand flying to cover her mouth. In that split second, the Ashfords faltered. Eleanor's confidence cracked. Serena shifted uneasily, and Daniel lowered his gaze. They had not expected anyone else to see, had not counted on their cruelty being exposed. And in their sudden hesitation, I felt a flicker of strength ignite inside me. I was still on the floor, aching, humiliated, but I was no longer invisible. Their violence was no longer hidden. There was now a witness, and with that witness came the possibility of truth. My humiliation began to harden into resolve. Dot lying on the cold marble floor, my cheeks still wet with spit, my blouse clinging damp with wine. I closed my eyes for a moment, and the present dissolved into memory. My body trembled, but my mind reached back to Ohio, to the small town where I was born. A place of cracked sidewalks and modest houses where dignity was measured not by money, but by effort. My father, Henry Morgan, was a steel worker with hands calloused from years of labor, a man who never spoke much, but whose silence carried lessons. After my mother died when I was 12, it was just him and me. He taught me to cook simple meals, to patch old clothes, to stand up when life knocked me down. He used to tell me Rachel people will try to put you in the dirt, but remember, you are made from steel. You bend, but you do not break. That strength carried me into adulthood. I worked hard, studied at community college, and became a bookkeeper. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. When I met Daniel, I thought I had found someone who valued honesty too. He was handsome, with soft brown eyes that seemed to promise kindness, and in the beginning he treated me with care. He told me he loved, that I was grounded, that I was not like the shallow women from his world. I believed him. I believed love was stronger than money, stronger than class, stronger than Eleanor Ashford's disapproving stares the first time I shook her hand. I still remember that day. I wore my best dress, navy blue and modest, and I carried a pie I had baked myself hoping it would show warmth. Eleanor's eyes swept over me like I was a bug crawling across her marble floor. She did not touch the pie. She only said, "Daniel, you should have brought her to me sooner so we could have talked." The word talked felt like a warning. Serena was worse. She looked at my shoes' plain flats I had saved up for and asked with a smile so sweet it stung, "Do you even know which side the salad fork goes on?" Daniel laughed awkwardly, brushed it off, and later whispered, "They just need time. They'll see how wonderful you are." I clung to that reassurance, but the years proved him wrong. At our wedding, Eleanor and Serena did not even attend. They sent a thick envelope with a cream card that read, "We wish you well with your choice." Not Daniel's choice. My choice. As if he had been lured, trapped. I remember standing in that courthouse in my simple gown, looking into Daniel's eyes, hoping his vow meant we would face the world together. For a while, I tried. I baked. I smiled. I attended their dinners, endured their critiques of my clothes, my speech, my job. I thought patience might soften them. Instead, it only sharpened their disdain. Each holiday grew colder, each visit heavier. I felt myself shrinking, my laughter quieter, my confidence eroding under the constant erosion of their contempt. And Daniel, the man who had once admired my strength, began to mirror them. He laughed at jokes made at my expense. He told me not to be so sensitive. He reminded me often of how much his family had given him, as though I should be grateful for crumbs of acceptance. There were nights I sat alone in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But then my father would call, his voice gravelly but steady, and he would ask, "You holding up, kid?" I would say yes, even when the truth was no, because I did not want to burden him. Still, his words echoed, reminding me that I came from steel, not glass. Those memories came rushing back now as I lay on the floor of the Ashford mansion, their insults and kicks still ringing in my ears. I thought of my father's tired blue eyes shining with pride when I showed him my first paycheck, the way he hugged me and said, "You did that on your own." I thought of the day I walked across the graduation stage at community college, the tassel brushing my cheek, and saw him wiping away tears with those rough steelworker hands. I thought of every moment I had proven I was stronger than they believed. And yet here I was on the ground being told I was nothing. The humiliation cut deeper than any physical wound. But as the memories swirled, I began to feel something else rising. A different kind of strength, one that did not come from ignoring pain, but from facing it. I realized the Ashfords had been waging a war against me from the very first day, not with fists, but with sneers, with silence, with calculated cruelty. Tonight, they had crossed into open battle. They thought I was defeated, but they had miscalculated, because what they did not know was that every cruel word, every insult, every humiliation had been forging me, just as heat forges steel. They thought they were breaking me. In truth, they were hardening me. As I pushed myself slowly off the cold marble floor, my side aching from the kick and my cheek burning from the spit, a new clarity cut through the fog of pain. For years, I had believed silence was survival, that if I endured long enough, perhaps they would grow tired of tormenting me. But in that moment, I realized silence had only fed them, convinced them that I was weak, that I could be humiliated without consequence. Their mistake tonight was thinking the violence would stay hidden within these walls. They had forgotten the camera that watched the hallway outside this dining room. They had underestimated the sharp eyes and quick hands of Mary Collins standing now in the doorway with her phone clutched tightly. For the first time in years, I saw fear flash across Eleanor's eyes. That fear gave me fuel. I was not broken. I was being remade. Inside my chest, the despair began to shift into something colder, more precise. It was not the hot, messy anger that makes people reckless. It was a quiet, measured fury that sharpened every thought. I replayed the evening in my mind as if it were a case file. Serena's smirk, Eleanor's spit, Daniel's betrayal, Mary's gasp, evidence, witness, motive, accomplice. My training was not in combat, but I knew numbers and patterns, and here I saw a pattern of abuse that could no longer be ignored. My father's voice echoed in me, telling me I was made of steel. Tonight, I believed it. The more I thought, the more the plan began to form. First, I needed proof. Mary's recording was a start, but the mansion had cameras in the hallways. If I could get the footage of Serena kicking me, it would seal everything. Second, I needed allies. Mary was one, but I would need someone who understood the law, someone who could navigate the system Eleanor thought she controlled. Third, I needed to steady myself to push through the fear and prepare for the long battle ahead. I could no longer cling to Daniel. He had shown where his loyalty lay. He was not my protector. He was their pawn, so I would fight alone if I had to, but deep down, I knew I would not be alone. For the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of defiance rise like a tide. I looked up from the floor, my hair sticking damp to my face, and met Eleanor's eyes. She expected tears. She expected me to cower. Instead, I gave her silence, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of strategy, the silence of a woman who had stopped being prey. Eleanor frowned, unsettled, and stepped back. Serena shifted, uncertain. Daniel looked away. And I knew then that tonight was not the end of my suffering. It was the beginning of their downfall. Mary Collins stepped further into the room, her phone trembling slightly in her hand, the screen still glowing from where she had pressed record. She did not shout or accuse, but her presence alone was enough to crack the facade the Ashfords had so carefully built. Eleanor muttered something about outsiders not understanding family discipline. Serena scoffed and turned her back as though the act of ignoring would erase what Mary had seen, and Daniel rubbed his temple as if the humiliation of being caught mattered more than the brutality of what had just happened. Mary's eyes, however, found mine. She bent down just enough to whisper so only I could hear. "I have this on video, Rachel. Do not be afraid." Those quiet words slipped into me like oxygen. Later that night, after Daniel dropped me off at our apartment with cold silence, I walked across the street to Mary's home. She ushered me into her kitchen, poured me tea, and without hesitation replayed the clip she had captured. It was short but damning, Eleanor's spit glistening under the chandelier light, her voice sneering with hatred, my body curled on the floor. Mary looked at me firmly. "I will stand by you. I have seen enough in my life to know silence only protects the guilty." Gratitude welled up so strongly I could barely speak. For the first time in years, I felt seen, believed. The next morning, I searched for a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one who understood cases of domestic violence and psychological abuse. That search led me to Thomas Reed, a man in his early 40s with a reputation for defending women who had been dismissed or silenced. Sitting in his office, surrounded by shelves of thick law books, I told him everything from the first cruel remark at the dinner table years ago to the kick that had knocked me to the marble floor. He listened without interruption, his pen moving quickly across the yellow pad in front of him. When I finished, he leaned back, his expression grim. "Rachel, this is not just cruelty. This is assault." And given their wealth and influence, they assumed they would never face consequences. But they left evidence, and evidence is something I know how to use. He explained that the Ashford Mansion's security system would have recorded the hallway outside the dining room. If we could access that footage paired with Mary's video, the case would be undeniable. "They think money shields them," Thomas said, his voice steady. "But the law is not blind, and neither is public opinion. You have more power than you realize." I walked out of his office with a folder of paperwork and the first taste of hope. Still, I knew this battle would not only be fought in court, but inside myself. Doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering that Eleanor's voice was right, that I was weak, that I was nothing. That night, I drove to my father's small house on the edge of town. He opened the door, his hair now more silver than gray, his hands still marked by years of steelwork. The moment he saw my bruised side and weary face, his jaw tightened. "Tell me what they did," he said, guiding me inside. I told him everything, my words tumbling out with the weight of years of silence finally broken. He listened, eyes burning not with pity but with pride that I was finally speaking. When I finished, he took my hands in his rough palms and said, "Rachel, you are not alone. You never were. They can spit on you, they can kick you, but they cannot take away the steel you were born with. It is time to stop surviving and start fighting." His words settled deep inside me, grounding me like bedrock. I left his house with my shoulders straighter, my resolve clear. Over the next week, I met with Thomas again to file the necessary documents and request the security footage. Mary agreed to give her statement formally. At night, I sat at my kitchen table, writing down every detail I could remember, turning pain into record, humiliation into evidence. Each note I wrote felt like a brick in the wall I was building between myself and the Ashfords' control. Meanwhile, Daniel remained silent, barely speaking to me, moving through our apartment like a ghost. He avoided eye contact, perhaps ashamed, perhaps resentful that I was refusing to play the obedient role anymore. I stopped asking for his support. I no longer needed it. My allies were Mary, who had seen and recorded the truth, Thomas, who understood how to turn truth into consequence, and my father, whose unwavering belief in me gave me strength. With them, I began to feel the pieces of a team forming around me, a circle of protection and purpose. One evening, as I closed my notebook full of written accounts, I caught my reflection in the window. My eyes looked different, no longer dulled by resignation, but sharp with determination. I whispered to myself, "They thought I was weak, but they have no idea what I can become." The invitation to Daniel's birthday celebration arrived on thick cream paper embossed with gold lettering, a performance of wealth that hid the venom beneath. Eleanor had arranged a grand evening at the Whitmore Hotel, a historic building in downtown Hartford where chandeliers dripped crystal light and servers in white gloves moved like chess pieces across the carpet. I knew this was not a celebration, but a stage, another attempt to humiliate me publicly to remind everyone in their circle that I did not belong. Thomas Reed studied the invitation carefully and said, "This is the moment. They will try to use it to destroy your reputation. Instead, we will use it to end theirs." His plan was simple in its clarity. Mary would attend with us carrying her phone and her statement. Thomas would bring the footage he had subpoenaed from the mansion's hallway camera, which showed Serena lunging toward me and me collapsing out of frame. My part was to hold steady to stand tall even when Eleanor spun her lies. The night of the party, I wore a navy dress, modest but strong, and a small silver locket my father had given me. As I entered the ballroom beside Thomas and Mary, conversations faltered. Eyes followed me with curiosity, some with disdain, but I kept my head high. At the front of the room, Eleanor stood near the podium, her pearls gleaming, her smile wide but brittle. Daniel hovered beside her, stiff in his suit, while Serena whispered to a cluster of friends, her laugh high and false. When dinner ended and the clinking of glasses settled, Eleanor tapped the microphone. Friends and family, she began, her voice warm with practiced charm. Tonight we gather to celebrate my dear son Daniel, a man destined for greatness, a man who deserves only the finest company. Her gaze swept the room and lingered on me, her smile tightening. Unfortunately, some choices we make in life bring disappointment. We open our hearts to those who do not appreciate us, who lack the refinement and strength required to walk among us. Murmurs rippled through the guests. I felt the weight of every stare, the familiar sting of being painted as unworthy. My pulse hammered, but I held my ground. Eleanor continued, "We have endured much, but we remain a family of dignity. Tonight we will show what it means to rise above." She reached for Daniel's hand, and he lifted his glass reluctantly. The script was set, the trap laid. Thomas leaned toward me and whispered, "Now." I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and the room turned toward me. My voice was calm, but carried. "I am glad we speak of dignity, Eleanor, because dignity is not found in wealth or pearls or in grand hotels. Dignity is in how we treat each other behind closed doors." Gasps whispered through the audience. Eleanor's face stiffened. "Rachel, this is not your moment." I ignored her and turned toward Thomas, who strode confidently to the projector. He connected the laptop, the screen behind the podium flickered, and then the footage appeared. The hallway of the Ashford mansion, time-stamped grainy but clear. It showed Serena stepping forward, her arm raised, and though the angle did not capture the impact, the sudden motion and my body collapsing partly into view told the story. The sound recorded from Mary's phone filled in what the camera could not. Eleanor's voice rang through the speakers, sharp and unmistakable. "You are trash. You shame this family." Then came the sight of spit glistening against the light captured perfectly in Mary's video. The room erupted with shocked exclamations. Serena's face drained of color. Eleanor's lips parted in horror, and Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead. Guests leaned closer, whispering furiously, phones already raised to capture the scandal. Eleanor tried to speak, but Thomas held up a hand. "The truth is no longer hidden," he said, his voice steady. "What you see here is not a misunderstanding, not a slip of temper, but a pattern of cruelty. Rachel Morgan has endured humiliation and violence at the hands of those who should have embraced her as family. This is evidence, and evidence will be taken to the proper authorities." Mary stepped forward, then her voice trembling but strong enough to reach the crowd. "I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. I recorded it because I knew no one would believe her otherwise. But it happened, and no woman deserves to be treated this way." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. Then came the murmurs of support, the sharp glances cast at Eleanor and Serena, the realization sweeping through the room that the Ashfords were not a family of dignity, but of disgrace. Eleanor raised her hand, her voice breaking. "This is an attack." She has twisted, but her words dissolved into jeers. Serena stumbled back, knocking over a chair. Daniel's face collapsed into shame. In that moment, I felt no fear, no humiliation, only the steady surge of justice finally being served in the light. I turned to the guests and spoke once more. Family is not defined by blood or by wealth. It is defined by respect. And tonight, you all see what respect does not look like. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and the story that would soon spread beyond these gilded walls was born. The fallout began the very next morning. Newspapers in Hartford splashed the story across their front pages with headlines that read, "Ashford family caught in assault scandal and social elite exposed for abuse." By noon, the footage had already gone viral online. shared by local reporters who had attended the party and captured every second of the confrontation. The image of Eleanor's face frozen in mid-spit became a symbol of hypocrisy, a wealthy matriarch unmasked before her peers. Serena's name trended alongside words like violence and disgrace. Calls flooded the Whitmore Hotel, demanding to know why they had hosted such a spectacle. Within 48 hours, Daniel was called into his firm's office and quietly asked to resign. His employer could not risk the association with the scandal, not when clients were already threatening to pull accounts. He came home that evening pale and silent, placing his box of office belongings on the counter before retreating to the bedroom without a word. For Eleanor, the consequences came swift and merciless. The Hartford Women's Society issued a statement announcing her removal from the board, effective immediately, citing behavior unbecoming of its values. Charities she once chaired returned her checks. Invitations vanished. The very circles she had spent decades cultivating closed their doors, leaving her isolated in the very mansion she had used as a fortress of power. Serena's fiancé, a young investment banker from Boston, canceled their engagement after his family watched the footage. The expensive ring was returned, her social media accounts went dark, and whispers about her cruelty spread faster than wildfire. For years, she had tormented others without repercussion, but now every insult, every sneer had caught up to her. She could not walk into a cafe without hearing murmurs. She could not attend a gallery without feeling stares pierce her back. While public disgrace cut deeply, the true reckoning came with the law. With Thomas Reed by my side, I filed an official report with the Hartford Police Department. The officers listened carefully as Mary provided her statement. Her phone offered as evidence the footage secured in multiple formats. The wheels of justice turned slower than public opinion, but they turned nonetheless. Within weeks, Serena received a formal charge of assault. Eleanor faced a charge of harassment. They both appeared in court, their expensive lawyers unable to erase the clear video evidence or the corroborating witness testimony. The judge, stern and unmoved by wealth, issued restraining orders preventing them from contacting me ever again. Serena was ordered to attend anger management classes and pay a fine. Eleanor's harassment charge resulted in community service and the humiliation of her name being read aloud in a courtroom full of strangers. For me, the legal victories were not about punishment alone. They were about acknowledgement proof that I was not crazy, not dramatic, not the weakling they painted me to be. Each document signed by the court was another stone removed from my chest, another chain broken. People from my community reached out. Women I barely knew whispered to me in grocery stores that they had seen the video and felt less alone. Men who once dismissed domestic cruelty as private affairs now nodded with respect. The Ashfords' power had dissolved under the weight of their own actions. Their empire of intimidation was gone. At night, when I lay in bed, the bruises fading, the ache in my ribs dull but lingering, I replayed the moment the judge's gavel struck wood. It sounded like freedom. For the first time in years, I slept without waking to dread. Their downfall was not just my justice. It was a warning to others who thought wealth gave them the right to abuse. They believed they could silence me forever. Instead, my voice, carried by truth and evidence, became louder than they could bear. When the dust settled and the headlines finally slipped from the front pages, the Ashfords retreating behind the iron gates of their estate, I was left with silence. It was not the suffocating silence I had lived with for years, filled with fear and humiliation, but a silence that felt like fresh air rushing into lungs that had been held too long. The first thing I did was pack. 2 suitcases, neatly folded clothes, nothing extravagant. I refused to leave in chaos because their cruelty would not dictate even the way I walked away. Daniel sat on the couch as I moved around the apartment, his face pale, his hands limp at his sides. He muttered something about how I was ruining everything, how I had gone too far. I stopped in the doorway, my hand on the knob, and said simply, "No, Daniel. You ruined it when you chose silence." I closed the door behind me and with that soft click ended a marriage that had never been built on loyalty. Driving home to Ohio was like crossing an invisible border. The landscape shifted from city lights to rolling fields, the roads familiar, the trees lined with autumn fire. My father, Henry, stood on the porch of our old house as I pulled into the driveway. His hair was grayer now, his shoulders bent from decades at the steel mill, but his eyes were the same steady blue that had always anchored me. He wrapped me in his arms before I even set down the suitcases. "You are safe now," he whispered, his voice rough with age but unshakable. In that moment, I believed him. The house smelled like coffee and old wood. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps, and the kitchen table bore scratches from years of meals and arguments. To anyone else, it might have seemed small, but to me, it felt vast. It was freedom. It was peace. Yet peace alone was not enough. The bruises faded from my skin, but the ache of memory lingered, and I could not let it all be for nothing. Every insult, every slap of contempt, every drop of spit deserved to be transformed into something greater. That urge led me to the local women's shelter, a modest brick building with peeling paint, but a heart that pulsed with resilience. At first, I folded clothes and served hot meals, but soon I found myself sitting with women at long tables listening to stories that sounded like echoes of my own. A mother who had been told she was worthless, a daughter shunned for refusing to obey a wife beaten in the name of discipline. Their eyes carried the same desperate question mine once had: will anyone believe me I believed them? And slowly, I began to believe myself again. The more I volunteered, the clearer it became that I needed to do more. With Thomas Reed's help and my father's quiet encouragement, I founded a small nonprofit dedicated to helping women trapped in toxic families find legal aid, safe housing, and voices they could trust. We called it Steel Haven, a name my father suggested with a small smile. "Because steel does not break," he said. Our first meeting was in the basement of a church with folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, and a dozen women who dared to show up. The air buzzed with something electric. Lawyers offered free consultations, volunteers pledged rides and meals, and one by one, the women spoke their voices trembling but determined. It was the beginning of something bigger than me, a home built not of marble and chandeliers, but of courage and solidarity. Meanwhile, the Ashfords faced consequences beyond what any court could deliver. Eleanor's charities disowned her. Her invitations evaporated her once revered name, now synonymous with cruelty. Serena's engagement collapsed. Her ring returned her reputation shredded in whispers and headlines. Daniel disappeared into obscurity, his career dismantled by scandal. They lived in isolation, their fortress of wealth turned into a prison of shame. They sent letters through lawyers filled with hollow apologies, desperate attempts to paint the past as misunderstandings. I never replied. Their punishment was knowing they no longer had power over me. Months later, I stood at a podium in a community center speaking at a fundraiser for Steel Haven. The room was packed with neighbors, strangers, survivors. My hands shook at first, but when I looked up and saw the faces waiting, I steadied. I told them my story not with tears, but with clarity. I described the dinner, the kick, the spit, the betrayal, and then I told them about Mary's courage, Thomas's determination, and my father's steel. I spoke of how silence feeds abuse and how speaking breaks it. My final words echoed across the hall. Control ends the moment you stop being silent. Family is not blood, it is the people who stand with you. Dignity is not given, it is demanded. Tonight I demand justice not only for myself, but for all of us. The applause thundered through me like a tide. Afterward, people lined up to thank me. Women whispered their stories, men gripped my hand with respect. Teenagers told me they felt braver just hearing me speak. It was not about me anymore. It was about all of us. Later that night at home, my father brewed tea and we sat at the old scratched table. He looked at me with tired but proud eyes. "You turned pain into purpose," he said softly. "That is what your mother would have wanted." His words wrapped around me warmer than any blanket. I realized then that my scars were not chains, but maps guiding me toward a life I never imagined. There are still nights when I wake with Eleanor's voice in my head or Serena's laugh ringing in my ears, but those memories no longer paralyze me. They remind me of how far I have come. They remind me that even steel forged in fire can become a sword. Justice is not instant. It is built piece by piece, choice by choice, voice by voice. And my voice, once silenced at a marble table, now speaks for many. To anyone who has ever been humiliated, kicked, spat on, or told they are nothing, I say this: you are made of steel. You may bend, you may bruise, but you do not break. Speak, stand, refuse to let their cruelty define you. That is how you reclaim your life. That is how you win. And if you are listening now, I ask you to join me. In the comments, write the one word that defines your survival. For me, that word is and always will be justice.